Good evening everyone, welcome to an Aussie Cyclone Chasers update. My name's Chris Natsopoulos. Tonight we'll be talking about the Northern Territory low which has now formed, and also the Coral Sea low which will form in the next few days. Looking at the Japanese satellite imagery over the last 24 hours, and we can see that the Indonesian region is very active monsoon wise, and then we can basically draw a trough down towards Australia here. We can see here through the cloud into this low pressure region which is located here to the north of the Arnhem Land district, and then continues out on the top of Cape York Peninsula and further out into the Coral Sea and the Solomon Islands. If we push a little bit further to the east, we can also see that activity extending a long way eastwards too. So it's not limited to the Northern Territory WA. There is a lot of activity over the Northern Coral Sea as well. At this stage, nothing over the Northern Coral Sea is actually showing any signs of organisation, but the Northern Territory low is starting to show just the hint of developing some type of organisation. So let's check that out in a bit more detail. About 6 PM WA time, 6:30 PM Queensland time. Here's our tropical low located north of the Arnhem coastline. Now, look, it's very difficult to pinpoint an exact centre on this thing just yet. So at this stage, it seems like a reasonably broad type circulation. There is, it's likely to be that the centre located somewhere in this area here, and we've got some excellent thunderstorm activity in and around that low pressure centre. Look, from there, it's expected to remain very slow moving over the next couple of days as it sort of drifts around here waiting for a particular steering mechanism to guide it. Now, what we're not sure of is whether the steering mechanism that eventually guides it will push the system southwards into the Northern Territory mainland and then in a southwest direction, or whether from here the system will go in a more west to southwest direction, remain over the water. Now, if it does the second of these options, so remembering the two options are the south and then southwest, as opposed to basic general southwest motion. Now, if it does this one here, we will see the system further develop, and that we will see it get into an area for better development, because at the moment this system does have a few things going against it for now, and let's talk about a couple of those things now. So right now, where the system lies, which is just to the north of the Arnhem coast, which is around about here, we do see that the system is undergoing about 20 knots worth of wind shear. Now, what we hopefully will see happen is that what you can see here is an upper level high. Now, what will hopefully happen is that that upper level high will move a little bit to the west and perch itself underneath, or sorry, over the top of the low level circulation center, which is here. What that should do in the future is to decrease wind shear of the system. So right now shear isn't great, and that 20 knots is going to really inhibit development for at least the next sort of 12 to 24 hours. After that though, there is a chance that if this upper high can move to the west, perch itself over the top of the low level circulation center, we'll see a decrease in wind shear. And in fact, if we look right across, because we're going to talk about the Coral Sea now, so let's save a little bit of time. Sorry, we're going to talk about the Coral Sea soon. Saving a little bit of time, we can look across here to the Coral Sea, and we can also see that the Northern Coral Sea has excellent wind shear conditions as well, and that's expected to remain the case for the next 4 to 5 days at least for the northern parts of the Coral Sea. Now, wind shear, once you get to about south of Cairns, becomes terribly high. So as long as the system remains in the Northern Coral Sea, there is a chance for further development of that particular system. We'll talk more about that shortly. And the same thing here for the Northern Territory. We have a lot of shear north of that and a lot of shear to the south, but right over the top of the Arnhem district, we should see this upper high decrease wind shear in this region over the next couple of days. Looking at the low-level vorticity, this shows us the amount of spin in the lower levels of the atmosphere, and we can really see that basically the greatest amount of spin shows where a low-pressure system will be forming. Now, what happens in the atmosphere at these lower levels is that spin creates low pressure, and so because the area of maximum spin is likely to be the area of lowest pressure. So we can see here that in general, though, we have, while this is our center point, in general we have a lot of spin in the atmosphere throughout the Northern Coral Sea and into the Solomon Islands, and then basically into Fiji. But we don't have too much to the west here. We do have a bit of a break in the monsoonal trough out here, but it really kicks off over the top end. We have a nice surge pushing in from Indonesia, coming in from the northwest into this particular monsoon trough, and we've also got a nice big high over Australia pushing southeasterlies into the monsoon trough, and so it's creating an area of very active conditions all through that particular trough line. So if we take a look at the latest Northern Territory Bureau of Meteorology official cyclone outlook, it does mention the tropical low, 1,006 hectopascals, located where I've shown you on a map. Now, it also then says that the system may move in a southwesterly direction during Monday, but it may also move in a southerly direction. So we could see a situation where the low could be located onshore or offshore, and that's what's bringing in a little bit of doubt into the overall forecast. So what we might see here is that if the system is located in the ocean over the Timor Sea, it should develop into a tropical cyclone. Sorry, they've used the word it may develop into a tropical cyclone. If obviously the system is located over land, it can't do so. So even though by Tuesday the possibility of this being a tropical cyclone is high, remember that probability is only the case if the system remains over water. There is a risk there that the system will be over land instead of water. There is still model guidance that's going both ways there. It's going to be touch and go. And look, regardless, folks, there's going to be gale force winds and monsoonal rain periods for the Northern Territory, regardless of what this thing does in terms of whether it becomes a cyclone or not. So I think we're really talking about splitting hairs here, whether it remains over water, whether it remains over land. If it does remain over water, it looks like it's going to remain so close to land that it can't really spin up into something very significant. At least most of the guidance is showing us that. Following on from that particular thing, it says here the system will be monitored closely for the risk of gales developing over the western top-end coast of the Northern Territory and Kimberley during Tuesday and Wednesday. And we'll go through a little bit of the modelling shortly that shows that happening. So first cap off the rank that I'm showing you is the UK Met model. Now the UK Met model is the #2 model in the world. The #2 model in the world when it comes to tropical cyclone forecasting. #2 model in the world in terms of general accuracy for the Australian region. So the #2 model in the world is showing us that the system is right here over the Arnhem coast. It sort of just does a bit of a dance out here and doesn't do too much over the next couple of days. Then by the 14th of January, it really starts to push in a southwest direction. Now notice in the UK Met model, it remains over the water. And notice this blue colouring of these dots is starting to get into the aqua colour. It's starting to get into the lighter colour. Now that shows us that by the stage that it actually hits the coast, it's likely to be a Cat 1, maybe even a 2 TC by the time it actually makes landfall. Now bearing in mind, once again, that we are talking about a matter of only a couple of hundred Ks in terms of guidance that might have it pushing more in a southerly direction over land or a more southwesterly direction like this model showing. So if it adopts that particular track, conditions are going to be pretty favourable for it to further develop in the medium term. Model 3/4 in terms of accuracy in the global forecasting models is the GFS, and the GFS has this system once again doing a bit of a dance for the next couple of days before eventually making landfall right around Darwin as a strong monsoonal low, very, very weak Category 1 borderline type system, and then pushing inland, and then by finally as the forecast goes out only to the 18th of January, it pushes in a westerly direction and then re-emerges on the coast out here near the Pilbara. And that's something very similar to what the European model has, although the European model holds off on that westerly shift a little later in its forecast period. But a very similar type of track shown by the European model, which we'll talk about now in detail. So if we take a look at the European track, we see a very similar track to the GFS by the European, where it basically makes landfall and then hugs the coast. So it makes landfall right around Darwin, just to the east of Darwin, and then really hugs the coast all the way down into the NT-WA border and pushes into WA Eventually, the longer term forecast from the European puts the system back out here on the water, or near the water, near the Kimberley-Pilbara area, which would once again result in a potential for re-intensification of the particular tropical low, especially if it holds its structure with a fairly strong monsoon in behind it. Let's take a look at some more higher resolution modelling from the European. Alright, so let's take a look at the wind associated with the system over the next couple of days. Now, tomorrow morning we see the system starting to form a more recognised circulation here to the north of the Arnhem Land District. Tomorrow night, as we head to tomorrow night, it sort of just sits in the same area and doesn't do much. As we head to Monday morning, the system pushes in a westerly direction. We start to see winds of 25 to 30 knots here well to the north coming in off the monsoon. And as we head towards Monday afternoon, we see that the system is really erratic moving, but we also start to see gales starting to develop well to the east of the system. So really it's very monsoonal in nature as opposed to a TC by the time it, according to the Euro model, makes landfall once again just to the east of Darwin, as we showed you just earlier, and then sort of pushes and hugs the coast. Now, as it does so, it's going to bring in some nice and strong monsoonal northwesterlies onto the top end coastline as it pushes in a southwest direction then right near the coast. Now remember, if this model is out by 100 or 200 k's, we could still be talking about TC potential of this particular system. If we look towards Tuesday night, and we look towards the conditions around it in terms of wind shear, we see that the system is located in fairly good shear conditions, sort of 10 to 15 knots of wind shear. So if it does maintain a trajectory sort of just to the west of where this model's showing, it is a chance of becoming a TC if it can remain over water. But at this point in time, the guidance from the EC and the GFS together are suggesting that it won't do so. The UK Met, remembering, is our number 2 model. It does suggest it'll push to the west. Now, if we also look at some rainfall coming out of this system, these numbers are in inches down here, so I'll let you pause the video whenever you need to, but this is tonight at 10 PM. We can see heavy rainfall over the northern coast. Now that sort of continues here to 4 AM, 7 AM, 10 AM tomorrow, 1 PM tomorrow, 4 PM tomorrow, 7 PM tomorrow, 10 PM tomorrow. We can start to see later on tomorrow night Darwin copping some fairly good rainfall as well from the system. And look, that continues on through to Sunday, and by about by about Monday is when things start to get very interesting for the more populated region here around Darwin, where we start to see some heavier rainfall moving south with the actual tropical low as it tracks through. This is now Tuesday morning. And we get that nice northwesterly fetch to the north of the system, and you can see here some very heavy rainfall just offshore off Darwin, but very heavy rainfall all through the district, all through the Northern Territory, particularly the north coastal parts of the Northern Territory over the next few days. Alright, let's talk about the Queensland system. Potential from the Bureau of Meteorology for this system to develop in the next 3 days, very low. Well, of course, it's not going to really form until day 4 or 5. Now, what they do stress after that, though, is that the monsoon trough is expected to remain in place, and the probability of a tropical cyclone associated with the trough increases, or may increase, in the middle to latter part of next week. And that's what modelling is showing us. So once again, if we take a look at the first model, and which is the second most accurate model, the UK Met model, we can see that the low develops out here in the Solomon Sea, and basically it happens in around about the 14th of January, and starts to push in a southerly direction to a south-southwesterly direction. By the 17th of January, is still located in the northern Coral Sea, about 500 kilometres or so, 500 to 600 kilometres east of about Cooktown. On the 17th, it is a Category 1 tropical cyclone according to the model guidance from the UK Met by the 17th. I guess the issue we have here is the accuracy between the different model runs. The accuracy of the models is really hindered in the Coral Sea due to a number of different factors in play. Now, part of that is the GFS model's intensity or propensity to spin up tropical lows inside a monsoonal trough through tropical convection. It doesn't handle tropical convection very well, and it decides to spin up tropical lows where there are none. Now, take this particular model with a grain of salt. Now, the GFS model is showing us around about the 15th to the 16th, a tropical low forms over the Torres Straits or near the Torres Straits or the Gulf of Papua, and then pushes in a southeast direction and probably forms into a fairly strong monsoonal low by that stage. Once again, east of Princess Charlotte Bay by the 17th, a little bit closer to the coast though than the UK Met model. So, folks, the key thing to note here is that this model, particularly for genesis, as in the start of a tropical cyclone, it does not do really well at all. And so do take this particular model with a grain of salt. I know it's showing it a lot closer to the coast, but it is likely a lot of the time to be spinning things up when it shouldn't be. So for this particular cyclone, or for this particular low, I would trust probably our number 1 and 2 models a lot more than this model, which is our UK Met model and our Euro model. So let's have a look at the Euro model. So the first sign of a low pressure system on the Euro model is around a Wednesday, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and we see here that it's a fairly elongated feature. Now, if we track it and continue looking at where it goes from here, we can see that it just sort of meanders around in the eastern Coral Sea and really doesn't do too much until around about Thursday or Friday, when it starts to become more of a feature. And it starts to track in a southwest direction, a little bit closer to Queensland. Now, at this point in time, we don't obviously expect it to affect the coastline just yet, and I'll explain why. But remembering that the Coral Sea is the basin that we do tend to struggle with in terms of forecasting, just because there's so many variables in it. So by about Friday, we can start to see gales developing well to the east and south of the system. Now, this is not a tropical cyclone. Despite the fact that it might have gales here, they're so far away from the center of the system that it's not actually a tropical cyclone. It can't be classed as a tropical cyclone. And if we fast forward through to Saturday night, we can see the system located basically east of Cairns, a fair way east of Cairns. So, I mean, you're not getting too much of an effect here on the coast. You're seeing just 10 to 15, 15 to 20 knots even of southeasterly winds. And you're certainly not getting much rain out of that, because by where it's located, the actual winds on the land are coming off the land, so you're not getting any real rainfall on this particular region. You can see here very sparse rainfall on the coastal fringe. It's really getting hogged into the particular circulation here, especially where those northerly winds and those southeasterly winds and northeasterly winds merge. This is where the bulk of our rainfall from this particular low will be, which is a long way offshore. It actually seeks to, in a way, it's like a vacuum, so it sucks out all of the rainfall that happens over the coast and takes it out into its circulation. And so therefore what we have over Queensland is a fairly dry period coming up as the system continues to remain offshore. So a couple of things we'll talk about with this system now is its expected forecasted movement in the longer term, which is more around next weekend. Now, if we look at the chart here by next weekend, we see that we have an upper level high out here, and we have an upper level low or an upper level trough in here. Now, what this means is that around the upper high, we have upper level winds that are pushing in this direction. Around the upper level trough, we have upper level winds pushing in that direction. So the upper level winds of the system should be pushing it in a south to southeast direction. Now, if the system is a strong tropical cyclone, we would expect it to follow that exact path. Now, the system is unlikely to be a strong tropical cyclone, so it's going to have a few different steering mechanisms impacting it. And another area that we look at is the lower levels of the atmosphere, or the mid-levels of the atmosphere, to have a look at what the steering flow is there. So this is the atmospheric flow at about 3 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. So this is what we call the 700 hectopascal flow. And we can see to the south of the system the flow is moving in that direction. But the stronger and longer arrows are coming in from this direction. And so we would expect that the system, given that the upper level winds are coming from the northwest to the southeast and the mid-level winds are coming from the north to south, we would expect the system to adopt a north to south type direction. So we would expect this particular system to travel in more of a direction like that, as opposed to a direction back into the coastline of Australia. Now, bearing in mind though that if it travels in this direction here, so if it travels in that north-south direction, it is getting closer to the coast because of the way the coastline is orientated. So do be aware that in the longer term there may be some fairly strong winds and possibly some good swells here over southeast Queensland. Now, can I stress once again, the Coral Sea Basin is very unpredictable, because if this upper level high doesn't quite develop, or if this upper level trough doesn't extend or what we call amplify northwards as much as forecast, we could see different steering mechanisms. It's still over a week away. So bearing in mind that we do have a tropical low forming in this area around Tuesday or Wednesday, it is likely to push in a more southerly direction through the middle part of next week, or south to southwest direction in the middle part of next week, before moving in more of a south to southeast direction later in the week or the weekend. So that's the current thinking at the moment. One more school of thought here to let you know that the other thing really going against this system is anywhere south of Bowen we're going to see massive amounts of wind shear, because what we have is an upper level trough forecast which is going to create those strong upper level northwesterly winds. But at the surface we actually have a high pressure ridge, and the high pressure ridge at the surface is creating these winds that are coming in from the southeast. And so what we have are these low level winds shown by the blue arrow coming in this way, and the upper level winds coming in this way. And so what's happening is as the cyclone or the low will try to form its convection, the tops of the thunderstorms get cut off by these strong black arrow winds, these upper level winds. They cut the actual tops of the storms off, and the cyclone can't develop storms over its centre. Now, bearing in mind that if it stays north of about Townsville at the time, then the system does have good conditions to further form into. But at this point in time, as I showed you, the steering mechanisms are showing that it's going to continue pushing southwards into next weekend, into this area of really unfavourable conditions. Well, this picture tells 1,000 words really, and there's no need for me to go on about it too much. If you live in the Northern Territory coastline, you're going to see epic amounts of rainfall over the next week. We're talking your entire month's average is likely to happen in parts of this region in a week, maybe less, depending on this exact trajectory of this low. And then that seeps into the North Kimberley in the longer term, and we should still see some very good rainfall starting to push into the Kimberley region and even the eastern part of WA. Depending on whether the system tracks more south, we could actually see a lot of that rainfall making it into central parts of the Northern Territory. The Western Gulf is likely to see a lot of rainfall. The eastern Peninsula coastline is likely to see a lot of rainfall in a northeast-southeast convergent flow underneath or south of the monsoon trough, and obviously out here towards the Solomons as we head into days 5, 6 and 7 we're going to see a lot of rainfall as that low pressure system forms and sort of just sits there and then starts to push in a southwest to south direction. Over Queensland we'll start to see conditions ease on the coastlines in the 3 to 7 day period, but over the next couple of days still a chance to see some pretty good shower and storm shower activity, and maybe even some storms in the surrounding inland districts. Alright folks, so very active periods coming up. We'll continue to update every night. Talk to you tomorrow night. Thanks for watching. Good night.